My name is Steve Wilson. I'm with the Illinois State Water Survey at the University of Illinois, and Katie Buckley is with me today. We represent the private well class, which is an online program for well owners, realtors, labs, other stakeholders related to private wells. And this program is funded by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and through US EPA, which is a grant they get. And today we're going to talk about what realtors need to know about homes with well water. And so I'm just going to get started. If I can figure this out here. Okay. This is part of a national program, as I mentioned, implemented through RCAP. And RCAP has 6 regions, which I'll show you that map in a minute. But they actually are the boots on the ground part of the program, and we're kind of the online portion of that. And so RCAP have staff in every state, and their private well staff work with well owners directly, and also hold, certainly before the pandemic, hold workshops for both well owners and other stakeholders to educate about private wells. You need to know those folks in your area, and you can always reach out to us. We can tell you who to contact depending on what state you're in. The webinar today is being recorded, and it'll be available like all the rest of our webinars on YouTube and through our privatewellclass.org. If you go to the calendar page or the event page, you can see past webinars, and then you can get to all those. There's 70 or more that we've done on different topics, and some we repeat. There will be time at the end for follow-up questions. We received a lot of questions. As you know, when you register, you're given a chance to ask a question in advance, and we went through those, consolidated, and we're going to answer a number of those in the slide deck for today. But if you have other questions, use your GoToWebinar app or window. There is a question box, and Katie's going to monitor that today, and we're making a list of those questions. And so at the end, we'll pull up those questions, and we'll go through them. And so it may be that we answer your question you asked in advance, so wait to do that unless there's something you didn't ask before. And lastly, I just want to mention that we're at the University of Illinois. We're still at home. COVID cases are on the rise in Illinois, so we've been asked, we were already at home, but we were asked specifically not to go in the office unless we absolutely have to, which we don't for this program. And so I have a daughter who's in online school. We've had a few instances over the last 8 months with internet outages or blips. And this where it says leaf blowers used to say mowing, but we're at the time of year, I know this morning it was 28 degrees. So I think we're done with mowers, but we still have folks raking their leaves and using leaf blowers, and you can never predict when that's going to happen or how loud it's going to be outside our window. So take that all into consideration. And listed here are some of the partners. NEHA is also a partner on a grant with RCAP, and not only do they provide a version of our 10-lesson class on their website that that environmental health professionals and I believe home inspectors can get credit for, but they also allow us to provide CEUs or CEs to environmental health professionals through their accreditation program for this webinar. Speaking of that, so the way the credentialing works at NEHA, if you are an environmental health professional or an LEHP, it's a 2-year credentialing cycle. And so if you took this class, you see at the bottom left or right corner, we taught the same class basically, different questions, but most of the same content in December of 18 and last a year ago in November of 19. So if you took it then and got credit for it and you're still in the same credentialing cycle, you can't get credit for it again. And I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. So if your credentialing cycle just ended at the end of October, and so you started a new one on, well, I did that wrong. If you started a new one on 11/1/20, that should say you couldn't take this class again until 11/1/22, 2 years from now, if you took it today and got credit for it. And so I just want to make you aware of that. We typically offer this Realtor webinar once a year. So a little bit about RCAP, as I mentioned, there's 6 regional affiliates, or if you will, they're actually the independent nonprofits. I apologize, my voice is getting hoarse for some reason. They go by different names: Communities Unlimited, RCAP Solutions, Rural Community Assistance Corporation out west. They're all part of our national program, though. And again, those are the states they represent, and that's the if you're in one of those states, like in Illinois, it's the Great Lakes RCAP, and we can get you in touch with all those folks. They do things like I mentioned. They work with well owners directly, especially if a well owner has an issue or a problem. They can come out and do an assessment. It's free. They do have limited number that they can do in a given year, but it's an opportunity for a well owner to work one-on-one to find out more about their well and the area around their well, and inform them of things and educate them on things like why they should sample every year, and if they have a well log and why they need to know that information. So we're at the State Water Survey, which folks in Illinois, some know who we are, but a lot of folks do not, and especially outside the state. If you're familiar with your state geological survey or natural history survey, there are state agencies that preserve, do outreach, and also applied research. Illinois just also has a third survey. That's the Illinois State Water Survey. We were the only one in the country for the last 100 and some odd years. Until Oklahoma created a water survey about 15 or 20 years ago. This year, we started in 1895, so this year marks our 125th anniversary. And the water survey was started because of cholera and typhoid outbreaks in the state. And so the state legislature created the water survey to document the water quality and help communities try to understand sanitary and public health reform issues, why they needed to have treatment plants in small communities, all that sort of stuff. And so our records go back that far, which I show this if you've been on a number of our webinars every time, but it's just really a cool story. This is Pana, Illinois in 1916. And at the time, they built a water treatment plant in 1912, but they didn't finish all of it because their mayor didn't want to spend the money. They started building a wastewater treatment system, a lagoon basically, out by the creek that was near there, but only half the town was sewered, the other half was not. And that was in 1914. So in 1916, they'd had a few typhoid outbreaks or a few cases over the past 2 or 3 years before this, but they started getting a lot of cases. And in less than a month, they had 35 cases. And the water survey was called in to try to investigate why and what was causing the problem, fully expecting it to be either because of the wastewater system or because of their unfinished water treatment system. After doing all that and spending time, they figured out that it was actually the Pana Ice Cream Company, which was where those arrows are right in the middle. Not only did they sell ice cream, but they sold milk. And they had 7 dairy farmers who provided milk to Pana Ice Cream Company. And they all put the milk in one large storage tank. And everyone who got milk at that time went to that tank and used a bucket to pull the milk out. And so that was where the typhoid was coming from. And once they figured that out, then the epidemic was over, if you will. And so this is in the record. So for every community in the state and for every county in the state, we have well records. The water survey houses the well logs for the state, as well as information like this. So you can go in our files and in Christian County, look up Pana, Illinois, and this record is just in those books, and it's been there since when this happened in 1916. This is just another picture. I'm also in charge of all of our outreach at the water survey, and right now there's a few of us who are going through all of our old records and scanning maps, pictures, things that are about our history. This is in New Athens, Illinois in 1912, where a young man's helping the water survey chemist who's doing some field analysis. Quite a field kit he brought with him there. Just shows we're in the game and have been for a long time, and that's kind of the point. Today, the water survey does a lot more applied research. In the groundwater section where I am, we do things like groundwater modeling. We help communities solve their water issues or water quality issues. I've done, for instance, some arsenic research looking at source water that has arsenic in it. Again, my name is Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist, and Katie Buckley's with me. She's our water resources outreach specialist, and she'll also, besides fielding the questions today, she'll be taking certificate requests. Afterward, you send an email to our info@privatewellclass.org, and I think I'll show that on the screen at the end to get that information, including the slide deck. So today we're going to talk about issues that are important to home buyers and sellers, and you folks as realtors, which is who our target audience is today. We always have a few others from other walks of life, if you will, but that and construction basics and basic well water quality. And at the end, we're going to go through a number of the questions that we received in advance. And we spent the last few days putting slides together for some of those questions that are relevant and maybe haven't been asked before, or have been asked by 6 or 8 people, because it's always the most interesting or most asked question related to like disinfecting a well. So things to remember: private wells aren't regulated except in a very few places after they've been installed. So even in Illinois, you have to take you have to install it based on construction code. It has to be a licensed driller, all those things, and it has to be tested. But then once it's in service, or if it's been grandfathered in because the well's been there a while, there are no requirements for testing, no requirements to make sure the water's safe to drink. It's all on the well owner. And that's changed in a few places, and especially related, and I'll talk about that in a minute, to when a home is sold that has a well. Now some states have created rules that require testing. But a lot of folks, especially rural folks, I grew up on a farm in rural Illinois. We had an old dug well that was only 14 foot deep. When it rained, our water was cloudy. I mean, my dad always swore our water was better than city water because we didn't put chemicals in it, not understanding that our well, which was in a pasture for cattle, was susceptible to surface contamination. And you could tell him that till you're blue in the face, and that's what he always believed. So contaminants can be colorless, odorless, have no taste. You can't go by that. Your water may taste great, but it doesn't mean that it's safe. You have to test, and that's one of the messages we stress here, and probably will a number of times today. I now live in town on a community water supply, and I spend $40 or $50 a month, and that's the cost spread out over 150,000 residents for sampling, maintenance, all the infrastructure to make sure when I turn on my tap, I have water pressure and it's safe to drink. And as a well owner, the person who buys or lives on a property that is using a well, that responsibility is on them. So basically a well owner becomes the water operator of a very small water system, and they need to look at it that way. There's things you need to do regularly, like sample. So your client may not understand much about a well. We've had folks who have contacted us. They bought a house out in the country, on this nice rural road, and they didn't realize what being a well owner meant. They didn't even understand, they didn't even know how to open their well or where it's at or all these things. So you need to make sure as a realtor that your buyer knows what they're getting into. And if it's the seller, what things they should do up front to make sure their home's ready to sell. So poor construction or poor water quality or lack of water can certainly change the value of a home. It might require some upfront costs for repair or treatment, but it's what we've learned is that it's more than worth it to do those things up front than have a sale stall or have no one interested in a property because you can't answer questions about the well and in that respect. And so as the buyer, flat out, we tell people it's buyer beware. Most of the time you're on your own. Like in Illinois, I have a friend, a colleague who bought a house. The realtor actually did the sampling and they only tested for coliform and nitrate. There's a lot of other things in our groundwater. We have areas in the state where there's arsenic, for instance. And unless you know those things and you take care of those, the person buying the property needs to understand what the responsibility they're taking on is. And so one thing we recommend is that, you as a realtor should take our class, but you should also have anybody that you're working with take our class. And that's the 10-lesson class that's online or that you sign up for, not this webinar, which is just a small piece of what you learn in the 10-lesson class, which is also free. There are states that are changing their rules. The oldest is New Jersey. So about a little over 20 years ago, New Jersey passed a law that requires a water sample collected by the state and tested at the state lab for any property sold that has a well. And there's a lot of information, and you can go to their website. But what it means for New Jersey is they get from my perspective as a researcher in groundwater, they get 13,000 samples a year that their state lab collects and analyzes. So that's research quality data. And what that's done for them is you can go on their website now and look at anywhere in New Jersey, and you can see what the water quality is because they've collected over 200,000 samples since they started this program. And that's great on that side. And the way they do things is they don't share those results with anyone but the buyer and the seller. And then it's up to the buyer and seller to decide what to do. And it's also up to the buyer and the seller to decide who pays for it. I'm not sure what the cost is today, but it used to be $600 is what the state charged. And then that's a negotiation between the buyer and the seller to deal with. But what it does is it ensures that everyone's aware of what the water quality is before anybody signs on the dotted line and to find out, that all of a sudden maybe they shouldn't be drinking their water. It's becoming more commonplace. There's a FAQ you can look up. It's really good information whether you're in New Jersey or not to understand what. And number 2 here, I wanted to point out, it says the act covers sales of 2 types. Any property that gets its drinking water from a private well that's on a property, and a property that gets its drinking water from a well that has less than 15 connections or less than 25 people it regularly serves 60 days a year. That's the definition of a public water supply, that second one. So if you have 15 connections or 25 people and they drink it more than 60 days a year, it's considered a public water supply, and it has to, it's under state regulation to meet the Safe Drinking Water Act. Smaller than that, less than that, it's considered a private supply and it doesn't have to follow those rules. And what that's caused is you have some savvy developers who've went in and put 1 well per 8 homes, 1 well per 10 homes, so that they skirt the law, and it's not a public water supply, but they save the money from drilling a well for each home. I would tell a well owner or a homeowner to avoid that situation. There's a lot of issues in it, and there's a question about it I'm going to get to in the questions, but it's really can be a really a serious problem and cost a lot of money for some folks if they're on the short end of however those rules are set up within that subdivision or between those folks that are sharing a well. Oregon also has developed these rules. I don't know if they're exactly the same, but I know it requires testing under a real estate transaction. And then Rhode Island has come along and actually went one step further. Not only do you have to test, but if there's something found that's above an MCL from the Safe Drinking Water Act, it has to be remediated, or they have the ability to have the home inspector come in or building inspector for the state can actually make the property unfit to live in. And so, that's taken the law one step further, but it's meant to protect people and make sure that things are being corrected. So these things are coming, even in other states. I mean, the state like Illinois, I don't see a rule like this ever passing our state legislature, to be honest. But as a realtor, you're doing due diligence for your client if you make sure these things are done and that they're going to have a good water supply, and it avoids litigation. Even in Illinois, there's a form you have to fill out, and you have to say yes or no. I know of no adverse problems with my well or my septic. And if it turns out that's not the case, then the person who just sold their home may be going back to court at some point and paying up for whatever needs to be done to fix that. And we're also seeing this on a local scale. This is a county in New York. The rest of New York has no rules related to testing after a well's been installed, but in Westchester County, they have developed a legislation as of 2007, and it requires testing. So, and I believe this is the county where they require testing of every private well, whether it's sold or not. And we see that some, especially in the Northeast, in areas like Connecticut and Massachusetts, where all the rules are really locally based by the health district. We've seen some health districts make rules that are more stringent and certainly not statewide related to testing, or even there's a few of those health districts who've given themselves the authority to condemn a well, which in 99% of the country, a health department can't do. Like in Illinois, if a well owner wants to go to a health department, we recommend they do. They may want you to not drink your water if it's not safe, but they can't tell you can't. And that's most of the country. So here's the 3 things we're going to talk about today. Do an inspection of the well and water system, and this is whether you represent the buyer or the seller. Test the water, And, again, buyer beware. I tell people all the time, don't buy a house until you've tested the water. If the homeowner's not going to work with you, I would really consider going somewhere else. And also inform your client and be informed. That means understand groundwater and wells and what the issues are there. The more you know and you can explain with good information, the better you're going to look, the more qualified you are, all those things. And, there's certainly realtors who've made their business just with rural homes that are all on private wells. So first of all, though, we're going to do the third one first about being informed. And I'm just going to go through the basics of the types of wells there are in the country, and then some of the issues you need to be concerned with. So the first type we're going to talk about are large diameter bored or dug wells. In the old days, before there was a lot of drilling machines and a lot of people use shallow groundwater, just the water table to get their well, they hand dug these wells and they used uncemented brick. And the water table was close enough to the surface that was their water supply. Those are the most vulnerable to contamination because they're getting surface water infiltration. It's the kind of well I grew up on, which I mentioned is 14 feet deep, and it had hand-lined brick. My grandpa hand dug it in 1933. And so it wasn't safe, and I'm sure it had bacteria in it most of the time. These days, if you're going to put in a well like that, it's typically like this machine is a boring machine. That's a 3 foot 6-inch bucket that's drilling that hole that's underneath those gentlemen's feet. And they'll put concrete tile down in that with 4 foot sections that are not cemented together. And it's those seams between the 4 feet sections where the water can seep in. And typically you'll find a thin sand lens or, or there's just the water tables there, which is where the water's saturated or the ground is saturated below a certain level. And the water just seeps in from there. But, that's the type of well you put in today only if you don't have access to an aquifer, sand and gravel or bedrock aquifer. And that does happen. We have an area in Southern Illinois that has a lot of large diameter wells because it's off the glacial moraine, so there's no glacial sands, and the bedrock down in the southern part of the state, most of it is highly saline. It's an old salt water. It's got salt water in it because it was a sea, million years ago. And so the only potable water source are these shallow wells. These are 3 examples. The one on the upper left is an old well that was hand dug, and it's covered by 2x10s and some tin sheeting and held down by bricks. But snakes, rats, sometimes even larger critters can get in those. They fall in and they die in there and can cause real problems, health problems. These posts all look rubbed raw because this is a cattle pasture, and it is rubbed raw. The cattle use those as scratching posts. So they're also doing everything else right by the well, just a really unsafe condition. The one on the right is the well like we saw being drilled with the 3.5 foot casing. Those are just vertical tile, like tile that run under a road to let water through, and it's got a concrete lid on it. All the pump and everything else is on the inside, or if it's really, or it could be in the house, since these are shallow enough to be suction pumps. And the one on the lower left, construction today, and I'll show you a picture in just a second, requires 10 feet of soil material above the actual well so that you're at least protecting a little bit from the surface. And so this has got a 6-inch casing that goes down to 10 or 12 feet, and then that concrete pad with a hole in it is there. And then it's the open 3 foot wide bored well. And this is what those look like from the side. So the picture that was on the right in the last picture with the concrete on top is the picture on the left here. But these are 36-inch, 3 foot diameter, and water seeps in. You can see there's a water table. It shows with a little triangle inside the well. That's the natural water level. And the reason you have a large diameter well instead of just a 6-inch well or a 5-inch well like you see with a drilled well is these are meant to be storage tanks. And so when you start pumping that in the morning for a shower, or they're running a dishwasher, or whatever, the water level goes down, but hopefully not enough that you run out of water. And then over the day, when no one's using the water level creeps back up because the surrounding geology allows water to seep through and back in. Water wants to be flat. Like water in your bathtub is a flat surface because it equal pressure from above in the atmosphere. The other type over here on the right is the one with it had a red monitor cap on top, well cap. And in this case, the down about 3 feet is the pitless, which a pitless adapter is an elbow that basically allows it to go into the house below the frost line, which we still see wells in pits today, which were installed before there was a pitless adapter. And those pits serve the same purpose. They basically cut off the well 3 or 4 feet below land surface. So if you're in an area where there is frost in the winter or a frost line or a freeze line, it kept it below that so your pipes didn't freeze. Another type is sand and gravel wells. And in a sand and gravel well, sand, if I have a jar of sand, it's about 70% sand and 30% air. So an aquifer that's all sand, if it's fairly uniform, has got a porosity of 30%, which means if I have 100 feet of aquifer and it's fully saturated with water, if I took all the sand away, there'd still be 30 feet of water. So they're very prolific, and the sand grains are large enough that water can flow through them easily. So a lot of times you see irrigation wells which pump over 1,000 gallons a minute that are in sand and gravel aquifers along rivers and streams because they're extensive and water can move so freely and they can sustain that sort of pumpage. In a sand and gravel well, they're usually PVC or steel casing, solid casing all the way to the surface, except at the bottom where they have a screen, which is what you're looking at there. And that screen is slotted. There's tiny slots in there that let the water through but keep the sand out. And you also put a gravel pack around it. And that's basically a gravel, we call it a gravel pack, but it's usually a sand that's uniform size. That's meant to help filter some of the finer sands so they don't get into the well. And that's determined, both the slot size for that screen and the gravel pack around a well are determined by the type of sand the driller pulls up when they're drilling the well. And they use that to size the screen so that it's optimal to, as large as it can be, but still so the well won't pump sand once it's installed. And this is kind of what that looks like. I have a different slide and I forgot to change it. This is a really poor example for one reason. It's that the pump is down in the screen, and you never do that because it creates too much velocity and it's much more likely to pump sand. Typically, the water level is far up above the screen, and the well is somewhere in between. So that you have, a lot of times when you pump a well, it may drop the water level in the well 10 feet. So if you put your pump 20 feet below the top of the water level, you're still usually way above the screen, but you're eliminating that velocity down in the screen. It's taking water in from more of the well. But this is what it looks like. There's a screen at the bottom in the aquifer, in the sand, and it's solid casing all the way up to the top. So if you have a 200-foot sand and gravel well and a 4-foot screen or a 5-foot screen at the bottom, that means all the water is coming in the well between 195 and 200 feet below land surface. It can't get in the well anywhere else because it's solid pipe. And that's important because it's different in a bedrock well. And we'll talk about that next. In a bedrock well, you have fractures in the bedrock. Bedrock's not like sand. It doesn't hold water in between all the grains. Water doesn't run through a rock. It runs around it. So it's the fractures, which you're seeing in this picture, are fractures, and there can be a lot of fractures. There can be just a few fractures. It really depends on how many fractures you hit, how prolific your well might be. And so typically how a well's installed for a bedrock well is once you drill down and hit bedrock. In this example, all the stuff with the little gravel up there and the saturated overburden is all unconsolidated sand, clay, and silt. And then when you get to the bedrock, that's the gray, you usually run the casing down about 10 to 20 feet into bedrock, which is what that's showing, and then you stop the casing. The bedrock is solid. It acts as a casing on its own. You drill on down, and whenever you hit enough fractures and you have enough water, you stop, but it's an open hole. So the well is actually the casing for the well below the steel casing is actually just the rock itself. And that's so that those fractures can actually get water into the well. But it also means it depends on how deep your bedrock is, and how many fractures. So like the third bullet says here, they can be influenced over larger distances. If there's only 1 or 2 fractures that intercept your well, it depends on where those fractures go. If they go back up towards the surface, they may be susceptible to surface contamination. They may run into a bunch of other fractures, and so you have a lot of water available. It's almost like pipe flow, and how many connections are there. But the other thing it means is that water's coming in your well everywhere below where the steel casing stops. And so in some parts of the country, bedrock is at the surface. And until some of the more current rules were put in place, you might only have 10 or 20 feet of casing. Even if it's a 200-foot well, you only have 20 feet of casing. The rest of it's open hole, which means water can get in below 20 feet, which isn't very protective from the surface in most situations. A good example is in New York. I worked out there a little bit, helping with some in upstate New York, helping with some of the RCAP folks. I gave a talk out there, and we looked at some of the wells and some of the problems they're having with water quality. And there's a number of wells, if you look in the state's database, where they're 600 foot deep, but they only have 12, 15, 20 feet of casing, which means water can get in anywhere above that or below that. And that's just more risky versus a 200-foot sand and gravel well where water can only get in between 195 and 200. And what I mean by risky is, the closer to the surface you are, the more likely that surface infiltration can affect a well. And that's kind of the big concern. Here's an example of a well log for Illinois from, this is a Bedrock well. And I show this example because there's a couple things on here that are pretty interesting. If you look at number 18 on the lower right, that's a description of the geology. So there's 4 feet of brown clay, then 26 feet of gravel, then 125 feet of clay, sand, and boulders. That's all glacial till that doesn't really produce a lot of water. There's a little sand and then broken limestone at the top of the bedrock, and then bedrock from 189 down to 257. There's 68 feet of it. And then they hit shale, which shale is like cemented clay. So it's not an aquifer. It really prevents water flow. So they stopped. There's no reason to drill any further. They've got 68 feet of limestone that's fractured, and so they're able to get water out of it. The person who filled this log out at the office assumed that the bottom layer was where the water was coming from without really understanding. It might have been someone who works in their file room or someone who's not a field person. Number 12 up there says water from shale from 257 to 260. Well, the water's coming in from basically from 175 to, well, no, it's not. I take that back. Water's coming in from below the casing, which if you look at number 15, they used 179 feet of PVC, which they used PVC because it's in softer material and, the rock's not going to break it, if you will. And then they use black steel to seat the casing into the rock from 179 to 199. So this well has casing down to 199, 10 feet into the rock, and the water can get in below that, nowhere else. But from 199 to 260, water can get in anywhere, versus in a sand and gravel well, there's only 4 or 5 feet at the bottom. And it also shows, number 17, the static water level. So a typical home well, it usually has a pump that's sized for maybe 5 gallons a minute. That's usually plenty. And so in this case, they put a 25 gallon per minute pump in it so they could overstress what they were going to need, and then they monitored what happened. The water level was 130 feet without a pump running, and then after running the 25 gallon per minute pump for 2 hours, it only dropped to 160. So we're still well above the casing, well above the bottom of the well, and so and you're not going to pump it at 25 gallons a minute most of the time. Now, this particular well is for a camp. It's a non-community system. It's Camp Algonquin, if you look up at number 10. And so they may have ended up with a 15 or 20 gallon per minute pump in there. But it still shows that pumping at that rate, you're not going to drop the water level that much, and there should be plenty. So well type matters. Like I mentioned before, you put in a Duggar bored well when there's really no aquifer. or if they're very old, like the one I grew up on, my grandpa hand dug. And there's still a lot of those in existence and they're still being used. They still work, and putting a well in is expensive. The others are drilled or driven wells in sand and gravel aquifers, or drilled wells in the consolidated bedrock, which is, the last example of bedrock well. And that's pretty common in the country. In the northern states where there's glacial remains, if you will, we have areas where there's 400 or 500 feet of glacial sand, silt, and clay that was deposited above bedrock. But in some places, there's no glacial moraine or glacial margin, and it's bedrock at the surface. In some cases, you may have choices. We have areas here where you can drill through as many as 3 or more sand and gravel aquifers at different depths that are all different before you even hit bedrock. And then you may have 1 or 2 bedrock aquifers that you can choose from. And so most of the time you're going to drill into the shallowest one if the water quality is okay and there's enough water, because it's expensive and usually you're charged per foot. And so, but if in a case where a shallow aquifer may get contaminated or may naturally have things like arsenic in it or some other natural occurring constituent, you might drill into a deeper aquifer in that case. But it's important to understand the differences, especially for the well owner. And if you know that for your area, you're ahead of the game. If you can look at a well log and go, oh, well, this is just a hand dug well, it's going to be a problem, we better test it, versus this is, a 400-foot well that's in bedrock. There's all these water quality samples from my state agency that tell me it's okay. That's a different animal. And so it's best if you have a log, and so you know those things, and also how deep the pump's set. Okay. So as far as poor construction, well construction code really started in the 60s. Some states didn't pass laws requiring construction code until as late as 2000. That's New York. A few states still don't have well construction code. 2, Pennsylvania and Alaska. And I know Alaska is working hard to change that. Pennsylvania, some of the folks there, they have a great outreach program in Pennsylvania through their cooperative extension. And that's partly because their state legislature hasn't passed well construction code, nor do drillers have to pass an exam to get a license. And so they want to make sure well owners in their state are educated because of those problems. But existing wells are always grandfathered in every state. So like the well my grandpa hand dug in 1933, still in use. And wells are still in pits, and some hand dug wells are still in use, as I mentioned. So not only are those a problem because of contamination from the surface, but they can also be a safety hazard. And just some examples, the one on the right here is a dead goat in an old well. They put a concrete tile near the top of this. It was, you can see the big stones at the bottom. This was an old stone well, and this well is not in use anymore, thank goodness. But it's on an old property in southern Illinois, and a goat made its way and fell in there. That could be a person or a kid. You see some of those stories. We'll go through that in a minute. But this picture on the left is from the state of Washington Department of Ecology. They're the state agency in Washington state that regulates drillers and well construction code. And so they have a blog, and they put pictures up there every once in a while where somebody's fallen in a well or something happened. Well, in this case, this is an old shallow well that's got, the corrugated pipe for a casing, and there was a piece of plywood over that. And the woman who lived there might have walked over that 1,000 times and never been a problem. But that day, the plywood broke and she fell in and it killed her. And if you look at this setting, though, this is in a little well house. You can see the funnel sitting there, and there's some twine over against the wall. And that looks like old insulation that's on the ground. Every time you go in there, you can kick some of that in. It works its way in. If there's any drafts or anything from wind underneath, it's just a really poor situation, and it's not safe from a water quality standpoint, let alone from a safety standpoint. And so what do you do with these kind of wells? You should try to bring them up to code, make sure they're protected at the surface, in some cases even put in a different well, because there's no way for those to be safe. If it's in a pit, extend a pipe casing up to the surface and fill it in. And then you install a pitless if you need to, if you're in a cold weather area. And then and also talk to some of the folks, your county extension, health department, our local health department, local contractor or some other well authority in your area to find out, what they recommend. There's a lot of help out there if you just go ask. So abandoned wells are the same thing. A lot of times someone tears down an old farmhouse, or there was a barn and livestock there and there's an old well, and somebody comes in and puts in a new home, they put in a new well, and the other well just sits there. They're also a safety hazard. What we've learned is that it's a huge issue, and they can also contaminate an aquifer if they're open at the surface and not sealed properly. So if you have one of these on your property, we tell well owners, you need to make sure you properly abandon it, because these unsealed wells, you're responsible. And, every state has different rules and laws, but if somebody were to walk on your property, whether they're trespassing or not, and they fell in and either got hurt or died, you'd probably be liable. And so it's something not to take for granted. And if you look at a property and if there are any abandoned wells, or you look through the well logs in your state because you're casing out a property and you find that there's 2 well logs for that property, try to figure out from the buyer or from the seller where that other well is and see if there's something that should be done with it, because the buyer should be aware that that's actually there. Here's just some examples. Again, the 2 pictures are from the Washington State Department of Ecology. In one case, they're trying to get a horse out of an old well, and the one on the bottom is a man who fell 45 feet. He walked away from it. They pulled him out. He was fine and very lucky. And these these newspaper clippings are all from the 90s. I'll point out the 3rd one, Jessica McClure in Texas. Those of us old enough to remember when that happened, it was covered live on CNN for, I want to say, for 20 some hours. This little girl, 18 months old, fell in a well, and it took them that long to get her out. And she's a grown woman with her own kids today, but it just gets to the point of how dangerous these wells can be. So whether you represent the buyer or the seller, you should do an inspection of the well and water system. If you represent the seller, it's to be better prepared, because we're trying to prepare people to be ready if they're the buyer. So you should make corrections before even listing it. Make sure that treatment's in place is working if there is any. When we started our class, one of the folks at the Minnesota Department of Health suggested we don't include anything in our class about treatment, because in his experience working with well owners in the field, more people don't maintain the treatment equipment, and it becomes the source of contamination in a lot of systems. Those filters can clog and grow bacteria, for instance. So you need to make sure the treatment is, if there is treatment there, what it's for, and that that's actually working, and any other known potential issues. Quiz the seller on those things before you ever list it or anything. And if you're the buyer, again, it's buyer beware. Protect yourself both from a health standpoint and a property value standpoint. You buy a home and then find out that the water is contaminated. Maybe even there's a great example I'll share in a minute. You have to tell people once you know that, in Illinois anyway, and you should anyway, morally, but it's an issue, and now it may turn people away, and you may not be able to sell your property. So I wanted to mention there's a lot of states out there that have information on if you have a licensed contractor inspect your well beforehand, or there's well inspectors or home inspectors are actually being trained now on well inspection. And even there's 2 associations that represent home inspectors. One of those associations has worked with us in NEHA so that their home inspectors can take NEHA's class online, because it's free to take. And so they're learning through that. But Wisconsin has a unique approach, and I wanted to point that out because this form is downloadable. So they require you, if you don't have to have a home inspection or a well inspection whenever you sell a property. But what they do require is that if you are gonna have a well inspection, that you use a licensed contractor or a well driller. And I mean by well contractor or well driller. And their point there is they can fill this out, they know the rules, they can tell you everything that meets the criteria for what the well construction code is in Wisconsin today. And so you go through this list, and you can it asks a bunch of questions, and then it even asks, does this meet the current well code? And so it's a really great way for you as the seller to have this on hand with a licensed well contractor sign it at the bottom, all that information. And again, you can use Wisconsin's form in any state. There might be a few things on here, but in essence, It provides a certificate of, acceptance, if you will, or it points out where the problems are. And if you're the seller, you're going to want to know that in advance and determine whether it can be corrected or not, or whether you want to just make that part of your negotiation later in the process. Every state that has well construction codes has setback distances based on things that could contaminate a well. I'm using Minnesota's as an example. These distances are what Minnesota requires. Your state may be different, but it's a good comprehensive description of all the things that can affect a well. They only require 50 feet for a septic tank. I think in Illinois it's 75. And in some states it's more than that. Or if they're vulnerable conditions, they may have other additional rules. If it's, fractured rock at the surface, or if it's a really sandy area, it may require more distance where water can travel faster. But I just wanted to point out there's a lot of things that can affect a well. And even like building overhang more than 3 feet, that's a practical reason. You can't, especially if it's got a submersible pump in it, you can't put a rig over top of a well and pull that pump, even with the service truck, if it's under a building. And, you might think, well, why would anybody do that? Well, there was just an article, if you go in our newsletter, our private well newsletter, you'll see in Massachusetts, they just had a guy fall through a floor in an addition of his house where there'd been an old well. And, we see wells in basements. We've seen them under the concrete in a garage, a lot of things, because people don't necessarily understand the well is an eyesore in some cases in your yard. This one family decided to cut it off below casing, and then they poured a concrete pad over it, and it's got a submersible pump in it, not understanding that now they can't get to that pump when it fails, and they're going to need a whole new well, or they're going to have to tear up their garage. So there's just a lot of common sense things that people don't realize, and you as someone who they look to when they're trying to buy a home or sell a home need to have that information. And again, I just went back to this just because there's a lot of good information here about things a well needs, whether it's got a good well cap, what the casing height is. And that's in reference, most states require a casing to be at least 12 inches or higher above ground surface. And that's in case there's any flooding. And when you go out to look at a well, you can tell right away, is it down in the bottoms where it could be flooded? All those sorts of situations all come into play. So as far as testing the water, if you're the seller, you want to consider whether you want to add treatment. It can be a selling point because you're saying, hey, I know our water is, it's hard, so we have a softener. And it turns out our aquifer here has low levels of arsenic, so we added, an RO unit, or we have a canister filter on our sink, because, so that gives the buyer a little more peace of mind that you're aware of the situation and all those things. And again, if you're the buyer, you need to protect yourself. Test for chlorine. One of the things that happens is someone will have a well that's really not safe, like the one I grew up on, and they'll chlorinate it before putting it on the market. Or they may chlorinate it if they know you're going to come out and do a test. They may disinfect it. So if you are going to test the well and you make an appointment to do that, make sure you test for chlorine, because if there's chlorine in it, that means it's been disinfected, because you're not going to find chlorine naturally, in the water at a level that it would be if it's been disinfected. So, and your lender's probably going to require some sort of testing. That's one of the issues we have today, is a lot of times, they're trying to protect their investment. And so it's just worth it if you're the seller to do all that in advance and make sure you know. Plus, it can really hold up the sale. I've had well owners call me and say, well, this property, they've already got 3 offers on it. And what I tell them is, well, if you're not going to test the water, then you need to be prepared that if there's something wrong, if it has arsenic or radium or, uranium or whatever, that you may have to add treatment that may cost, more than $1,000 and may cost hundreds of dollars a year to maintain. So it's an issue. And for some people, if it's a really expensive home, that probably isn't going to be as much of an issue as it is for someone who's, adding $1,000 or $2,000 treatment is beyond their means. And so all of that matters, but in the end, it's better to know. So two examples, I don't want to know. So this happened to me. We were doing an arsenic test or arsenic study looking at how variable arsenic was in an aquifer in Illinois on a very small scale. So I went into a subdivision that was out in a rural area where every home had a well. And I went to every home and talked to them about, we know this aquifer has arsenic in it. We'll do a free sample. You'll know what's in your well. And one gentleman said, I don't want to know. And he said, you can sample my well as long as you don't send me the results and you do it when I'm not home. And so, I could not figure out what he meant by that. And so I asked him, and he said, well, I'm trying to sell my home. And in Illinois, there's a form you have to fill out that's legally binding that says you have no issues with that you have no known issues with your well or your water quality. And so he wanted to be able to honestly say no. Even to me, it's questionable because we told him there's arsenic in the area. But he wanted to be able to honestly say he knew of no issue with his well, so he didn't want us to send him the results. You can figure out whether that's the right thing to do or not, but it's not, in my opinion. The second example was I got a call from someone in a different county in Illinois who had bought a home 4 years ago, and she was mad as a wet hen, and she was tearing me a new one because I went at the water survey, and we house the state's well logs. We're not a state agency anymore. We were until 2008. Now we're part of the university. But she bought a home. They only tested for coliform and nitrate, and the county health department told her that it was safe because of that. So she bought it. She has 4 kids. And because there was some article in the newspaper, she had her well tested for arsenic, 150 parts per billion of arsenic, where the health standard today for the Safe Drinking Water Act is 10. So I had 15 times the limit of arsenic that you can have in a community water supply. So of course she was upset. Her kids have been drinking water that's got arsenic in it. And so I explained all of that, and it's buyer beware, and why you have to be informed if you're going to buy a home with a well. And that happened about 3 years ago. So it's it is an issue, and you don't know. Again, arsenic, you can't see it, smell it, or taste it if it's in water, right? And you wouldn't know it unless you test for it. So what do you test for? That's probably the most common question we get. And again, I want everyone to realize that this is a national program. So what we're recommending are things that work nationwide. And so it is different, depends on the depth of the well, what kind of geology you have, known contaminants in the area. And I say that because you should go to your county or local or state health department for advice. Just ask them, is there anything in this area that's a known contaminant or any issues that the state has? Your state primacy agency would know. That's the ones who regulate community water supplies, but they also regulate landfills and all those sorts of things, and gas stations and underground storage tanks. If there's anything nearby, they should know it. And it might require a little work on your part, but it's good to know where those things are. And if you work in a given area, you can, in some states, they're very proactive, and you can even find some of that stuff on a map online. So, any contaminants identified in your area, you can call your state well record folks, ask the neighbors or nearby folks, any drillers in the area. Co-op Extension may be able to help depending on how active they are with well issues in your state, because that varies depending on states. And again, your lender might have requirements for testing. And so it's important to do those things that they require as well if they have a list. But the bottom line is, it's what we recommend is one set of things, but then you should also do some legwork on your own to see if there's anything locally that might be different. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that. So related to natural groundwater quality, you can find out this information. We have several aquifers in the state that have arsenic in them. We have a couple places, very limited that we know of, that even have high levels of fluoride, which, fluoride, they put in community water supplies at low levels because it helps promote good hygiene for your teeth. But if you have too much of it, it can be a health issue. And so those things, someone in your state probably knows. And there's also nuisance things that cause stains or odor in your health department, and they should know all that too, or especially your local contractors or the folks that install treatment equipment will know if any of that stuff is in your area. And knowing those things will help you understand what to even sample for when you get a water sample. So by things that are available, here's a couple examples. In Massachusetts, the Department of Environmental Protection You can type in your address, and it'll tell you if there's arsenic or uranium issues. If you have a bedrock well, they've mapped that and they have enough samples that they know where those issues are. And it's not the entire state. In Rhode Island, that splotch in the middle is beryllium. I didn't realize until I found this on their website that is even a regulated contaminant. And I have this on. Katie, you told me to do that, and I forgot. It's going backwards now. So the little dots all over the place are where there used to be apple orchards or fruit orchards, and those have arsenic in the ground, and a lot of that can leach and eventually get into a shallow aquifer. And so they point all those out, and you can find more out from the Rhode Island Department of Health. But the example I show here is what I really wanted to show you is beryllium. There's a large naturally occurring geology there that has beryllium in it. And, you know, I would never suggest anyone test for beryllium because I've never seen it before except there. But your Department of Health will know if that's an issue in your state. And so that's why you need to talk to them. Wisconsin went a step further. They took their DNR as their primacy agency, and they also regulate their private wells and well construction. And they put water quality samples online that for tests they've done. This is an interactive map. And so I clicked on arsenic. I'm just gonna do this the rest of the day. I apologize. So I clicked on arsenic by county, and you can see where the hot spots are. A lot of the counties in green mean it's less than 5 micrograms per liter or ppb, which the health standard for public water supplies is 10. But you can see in the Green Bay area, there's 3 counties there where the average sample was over 21, 2 times the limit for a community water supply. So if I'm moving into Wisconsin, or if I live there, or I'm considering buying a house in a different county or moving to Green Bay for whatever, for my job, these are things that I'd want to look for in advance and understand if I was going to look at a house. And you can even see a few of these counties have no samples. And so it's not an extensive database. And this slide is several years old. And so I'm sure the database is more complete today. But you can look for different things, arsenic or nitrate or some other issues. Yeah, so it's just more states are going to these kind of things. And so it's useful. Or even some counties have gotten grants like from CDC to develop these sorts of features just for their county. So here's what we recommend. We recommend sampling annually for coliform and nitrate. People mistake that to mean that that's all you need to test for because we say you do it every year. And that's what health departments a lot of times will recommend. The reason you test for coliform and nitrate are because they should not be in your well at above background levels, but they're really, they're everywhere in the shallow environment, especially in agricultural states. You have higher nitrates in the shallow aquifers and shallow groundwater in the water table. And bacteria, you know, exist because of things that we do, right? Our septic tanks, our feedlots, other things. So if you find coliform or nitrate in your well that's above the standard or at all for bacteria, it simply means that there's a pathway into your well for those things. And that should be a red flag. It means your well's not properly sealed at the surface, or it's got a breach somewhere down below that's fairly shallow and allows those things in. It doesn't mean your well's safe from things like arsenic or, you know, lead's another example, because most of the lead problems aren't because it's in the water, it's because it's in your pipes in your home. And so you need to test in your home to see if that's actually an issue. But I want to make it clear that testing for coliform and nitrate doesn't mean the well water is safe. It means that your well is properly protected at the surface, okay? And so the other things here are what we recommend. And again, if you have copper piping, then copper, zinc and cadmium, if it's galvanized piping, which a lot of older homes will have galvanized piping in them, which, you know, that galvanizing material contains lead as well. And so up to 11%. And so we see, like in states like Virginia, where the water, natural water quality is a low pH, like 5.5, we see galvanized piping being used as drop pipe for the pump, which might be 300 or 400 feet down. So you have 300 or 400 feet of galvanized pipe that the water runs through in the well. So by the time it gets to your home, it's already leached some lead in those cases, because the pH is low enough that the water's corrosive or aggressive is the term used today. But all of these things together give you a good snapshot of what your water quality is. And for some things like naturally occurring arsenic, what I know as an arsenic researcher is that if it's a deeper aquifer and you have arsenic in it, it's pretty consistent. I have some monitoring wells around the state that I sample every 10 years, and one of those wells is always lower than the rest, but it's around 3 or 4 ppb, but it is every time. And in other parts, even 2 miles away, we see arsenic at maybe 40 ppb or 80 ppb, depending on which direction you go. And it's just because it's naturally occurring and there's source material in the actual grains of the aquifer that have arsenic in it. And so the chemistry changes, or because of a slow, it's not oxidizing, reducing conditions for the chemistry, it's slowly releasing arsenic. And so but it does it at kind of a constant rate. And so it's really worth knowing these things. Every 3 to 5 years we recommend. One, so you have an idea if your pH is low, or if your chlorides are high. Some of those things can speak to how aggressive your water might be. But even things like lead, lead pipes are only a risk if your water leaches lead. In some cases, the water has a higher pH, or it's not aggressive, and it actually forms scale on the inside of the pipe. And where that occurs, then there's no leaching. It's actually being protected by that scale. And so in Illinois, for instance, most of our groundwater has a pH of 7.5 or higher. And so lead issues in our private wells aren't as much of an issue because there's no treatment to change the chemistry like there is in the community water supply and those sorts of things. So again, get advice from your local state health department. They're really the ones who should have a better handle on what's in your area. And the other thing I tell people, because I have a few people come back to me and say, well, my health department said to contact you. Because we've learned after we started this program that, many health departments are well equipped to handle your questions and have someone on staff who understands wells and those issues. But we run into some counties where or local health districts where that's not the case. They don't have a lot of well problems. It's not mandated by any regulations to deal with wells. And so they actually don't have anyone on staff who can answer those questions. What I do in those cases, if somebody contacts me and says, well, I've already talked to my local health district, I call the state health department and try to find out more information, and even call them back to the local health district and try to work with them and find somebody, either, the state water, in Illinois, the state water survey, but in other states, your state geological survey or USGS, or your department of whatever your water quality group is in the state. And they go by different names, DEP, DES, DNR, it just depends what state, how they're set up and their rules. But we've tried to help out when we can, at least get more information to folks. So you need to be inquisitive, as I mentioned earlier. So whether you represent the buyer or the seller, inform your client or be informed. You can provide resources. Consider even putting it on, developing a web page if you do a lot of business with private wells. Educate yourself, as well as have your clients become educated. Have them take our class. Talk to the local labs in your area. Ask questions from Extension or your health department. There's other classes and information online. The problem you run into sometimes is that there's conflicting information online. There's so many rules. For instance, one of the questions was about disinfecting your well. I went through probably 70 different documents that are out there on how to disinfect your well. Some are great, some are really poor. Some don't speak to all the issues. Some don't have good instructions as far as step by step. There's all kinds of information out there. You need to find consistent information. And that's one of the things we really try to work on, is making sure that what we give people is something that everyone should be using, honestly. And so insist on an inspection of the well and the area and sampling, even if it's not required. Your lender may require, as I mentioned, but transparency and professionalism will stand out for you as a realtor, and they win the day down the road. They far outweigh the benefits of trying to cut corners and doing those things, because it only takes one time where someone is really dissatisfied because you steered them wrong, that word's going to get around. And it really is, if people who do their due diligence and even selecting a realtor, they're going to find out that stuff. These are just some sites that are out there. For instance, in Connecticut, They have a private well program. Some states don't have much of a private well program. They do here. They even have they have an event every year, a conference. This is in Wisconsin. A lot of tips. There's just a lot of information available to you. Oh, wrong way. Sorry about that. And here's a realtor. I'm not, suggesting anything for this realtor. I don't know these folks. I found this and they're in Colorado, but they did have references to some videos and those sorts of things. So a little bit about our class. It's 10 lessons. This isn't our class. This is a webinar that supports our class. It's sent as you sign up for the class. It sends you one lesson a week for 10 weeks. And it walks you through everything you need to know as a basic course in being a well owner. Talks about how groundwater flows to the ground and gets into your well types, all those sorts of things. Then these webinars support that. We do a webinar every month. Again, we only do one once a year on for realtors per se, but we do them on different topics like septic systems once a year in July, or for different groups like we do several for environmental health professionals. And our website is privatewellclass.org. In addition to that, there's videos, podcasts, and these webinars are recorded. And then we also have an email address and a phone line that we man during the workday that people can ask questions, and they do. And that's a good thing. We try to help them out or try to find somebody who can help them. And in many cases, we're sending them back to someone locally to give them help. Our CAP staff person in a lot of cases. So when you go to the website, this is the front page. You can just click on take our free class or learn by email, and that takes you to the page where you can sign up for the class. We just need your email address, first name, and where you live is just the state. And that's honestly, that's tracking we need to do because this is a grant funded program, and we need to be able to show RCAP and EPA that we are reaching folks in all 50 states, and we are. And so you can sign up for the class instruction. That's every 7 days. The outreach partnership isn't really for well owners. It's for realtors, labs, extension, environmental health professionals, drillers. And it really, by a partnership, it means that we're going to send you our newsletter once a month. And it's full of information that's useful to you as someone who works with well owners, new documents that are out there that we think are good, resources that you can use to learn more about wells, those sorts of things, videos that we've come across that are actually really useful that, some of those we've even developed. We've developed the entire class in Spanish, and if you're in an area with a lot of native Spanish speakers, we get about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 new folks signing up through this every month or every 2 months. So it's not extensively used, but it was worth doing. We were fortunate being at the University of Illinois that we had a PhD engineering student who was from the country, Columbia, who really took this under his wing and developed all this material. He's even frustrated by some of the translated material that doesn't make sense or it's not done very well by folks who aren't native speakers. And so we were fortunate. We handed it all to him, and he developed this great class, including some of the videos we have been all transferred or translated into Spanish. So even the figures that we have here, like the top figure here is from the Minnesota Department of Health, but he translated the whole thing and redid it in Spanish. So, it's a hydrologic cycle, how it works, and this is just part of lesson 1, and it's really useful. For each lesson, we have a series of resources available. So if you click on resource webinar, you'll see it's a drop down. And one of the things is for each of the 10 lessons, this is for lesson 1 and lesson 2. These are other publicly available and free resources that you can go to learn more. And I say that because the private well class, those lessons were written conversationally. Like I was talking to someone and explaining things to people. That really works with a lot of folks, but there's some people it doesn't work with at all. And so these resources are here so that if you aren't getting everything out of what's in our lessons, or you're still confused about some of the topics, there's these things now that tell you what grade level that you're writing to. Well, there's some terms in groundwater like permeability and porosity that you need to understand as a well owner and then there's no way to make it under some other level, period. And we're not gonna. We want you to understand it. So if you don't understand it the way I explained it in the class lesson, some of these other documents will help. And there's one of these sets of different documents for each of the 10 lessons. We also, again, we record all our webinars. I mentioned our July webinars on septic systems. We bring in an expert. It's actually an environmental health professional from Massachusetts who works for RCAP Solutions, who was an inspector for 8 years on septic systems. And so he answered all your questions if you were on those webinars, and he's someone we lean on because I am not a septic expert. I've learned enough just to be dangerous, but it's really good to have someone like that who is. So when we get the questions we get, he was able to answer all those. And they're all in these recordings. So just like this presentation, the first hour or so is our canned recording, if you will, but the rest of it are the questions that people ask, and they're going to vary every time. And so it's worth going through all of our videos if you're interested, just to go through the questions. Now, there are a few questions like disinfection that come up every time, and we answer them every time because it's that important, but many questions are different, and it's really worthwhile to go through all those. We also do topic-specific webinars, like twice we've done this one on lead. I don't believe we need to do it again. We've addressed all the issues, and we have a page set up to provide resources, but we brought in an expert from Virginia Tech who works with well owners and lead, and they certainly have those problems in Virginia because of their, just the water chemistry in their aquifer. And so she presented on what they found and what you need to consider. So it's really worthwhile going through. If you have an older home, especially before the 80s, but even really lead-free didn't start until 2014. So a lot of even homes with copper pipes have lead solder. And as Kelsey, who did this presentation, or most of it for us, will tell you, it doesn't take very much lead solder to cause a problem if the water is aggressive. And again, as I mentioned, we have a page for that. What you should know about shared wells. Someone asked a question about that. I'm going to talk about that more, but we have about 18 videos now, I think, that are on specific topics. What to know about a shared well? How does my pressure tank work? What is a sand and gravel aquifer? They're 4 to 6 minutes long. They're just meant to be there to give you kind of an indication of what's going on. Why does my well keep losing pressure? This is one of the more popular videos we have. I think this one, or how does my pressure tank work? One of those two has over 300,000 views in 4 years. And that's because a lot of people have pressure problems that have a private well, and there's not a lot of resources out there for them. We have a podcast. The first 3 lessons are done, and the rest of those, the other 3 are from interviews we've given for the Rural Farm Network. Farm Bureau in Illinois has an RFD radio program that we went on and talked about abandoned wells and other issues. If you are interested in being a partner on our program, again, really what that means is you get our newsletter and you get information from us when there's going to be something new, like the brochure I'm about to show you. You can sign up and you'll start getting that. Our newsletter has grown it includes over 600 people now around the country that are all working with well owners, and that's pretty cool. This is our newsletter from 2017. I highlight that because we did a well sealing demonstration along with a local Groundwater Guardians group and a few others, and this is the driller who's putting some bentonite chips down this old well. This was in the middle of town, and someone found they bought this property and it had an old dug well on it right next to the home. And you can see how flat that brick looks on the side of the home. That's because the foundation's pushing out because there's a big hole outside. And so we're filling that in, and environmental health professionals from surrounding counties came in and were able to get CEU credit, and we made a video on how you should seal one of these wells. So all our newsletters are online. If you scroll down the page where you sign up, you can take a look at those. What I want to get to is we also have resources available, a downloadable PDF, and this brochure isn't something you can download, but well, you can download the PDF, but it's going to have margin problems because you can't print it to the edge. We actually printed a bunch of these and we offered them for free, and we've done that 3 times, and we've printed over 80,000. And I want to show that to you in a second because it's something that we are getting ready to put out another call for those if anybody's interested. We've also held 2 conferences, a 2019 and a 2017 conference. If you go to our webinar page, in the drop down, it says the conference. These are half-hour talks by professionals related to things. We held the second one in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is one of the states without well construction code. So we had a hydrogeologist from Pennsylvania talk about how to develop a private well ordinance, which he was involved with in one of their watershed districts. And so things that are relevant, we had a bunch of treatment professionals at this conference talking about lead and nitrate and different issues, PFAS. We had a PFAS speaker even. And so all of those talks were recorded and we put them online. They're on YouTube. And you can get to them there on our YouTube channel, which is at the bottom of our main page, or and they're all free. This is the brochure I mentioned. We've even left a place below private well class and above the RCAP logo where you can slap on your own label. We hand these out for free. A lot of health departments, that was our goal, was to give these to local health departments that they could put out in their foyer or by their front window so that people could take them. But it's really, it talks about our private well class, and it talks about what you should do to why you should have your water tested, and what you can do to learn more. The third one there is to take our class. And so it's self-serving in that respect, but it is worthwhile information. We've had over 8,500 people take our class, and over 20,000 different people take our webinars. And so, our approval rating, if you will, from our class is well over 99%. And it's really worthwhile to share with the people you serve that have private wells or that may be buying a home with a private well. And again, we've also put that in Spanish and made it available. We also have a Realtors page. You can join our partner community, which is really the same as signing up from before. And it takes you right to the Realtor webinars if you're interested in past ones. So the goal of our program really is to help well owners understand these 3 things: why their well is important, why they need to understand how it works, so that they can really help protect themselves from any risks from poor water quality. And so, it's something that you can have them contact us. You can contact us when you have problems. We're here to help out, and that's kind of the goal. It's it's a really great program from that respect because it's all free, thanks to the funding we get from RCAP and US EPA. So we did get a lot of questions, and I know I'm going to run a little long today, and I apologize, but there's a lot to cover. If you have questions that don't get answered, or if you have questions about some of the material I presented, you can still use a question box, and Katie's going to track those, and we'll go over those at the end for those who are willing to stick around. And so I'm going to go through a number of questions here. One we got was, how much does a new well cost? So this information is about 4 years old, but it's still very relevant, but it really depends on where you're at. In some states, like now in California, especially since the drought, they're drilling wells for homes that were 300 or 400 feet deep that are now going 700 feet deep because the drought and the pumpage out there has really caused water levels decline out there. And there's multiple aquifers, but a lot of them are going dry. And so most wells out there are over $40,000. But you can see the differences. We asked, the same type of well. It really depends on where you're at. What we did is, the National Groundwater Association has a list of drillers that are members in every state. And so we went to that list, and Katie just picked 8 states and picked a random driller that's on that list. That's an NGWA member, and we asked them, which is still pretty useful information. Part of that question too was, do wells ever go dry? Well, yeah, they do, but they can go dry for a variety of reasons. For shallow wells that are water table wells that are either sand points or someone's hand-driven a sand point, it's only 25 feet deep, or a large diameter dug aboard well, in a dry year, those wells can go dry. We have places in Illinois where people haul water during those years and maybe have a 2,000-gallon tank that they have to chlorinate because it's in the sun or whatever, or they pour it directly into their well. They get water from the community. That's a losing game because the water is going to infiltrate out. There's a reason why there's not water in the well, but also dry conditions can lower water levels in an aquifer. And it may not be that your well's dry. It may be that your pump is dry or the water levels drop below the level of the pump. You may have, there's places, wells that I've worked with where they still have 80 feet of water below the pump in the well. So you can simply lower the pump and you're okay. But in other cases, the well actually it's dry all the way to the bottom, and then you might need a new well. In some cases, few cases, you can deepen a well, but that's a tricky thing, especially if it's already got a screen. On a Bedrock well, it's a little simpler because you can get a drill rig and the piping and the bit through the casing. Then if you pulled the pump, it's just an open hole down at the bottom. And so sometimes you can deepen those. But it could also be because of well interference. Means, if some irrigation went in nearby and they're pumping during the summer 1,000 gallons a minute, during the night or whatever, over a course of a growing season, or some industry came into the area and they're using a lot of water. There's a lot of reasons, but that's why you go talk to your local government folks and find out if one of those might be the issue. In some states, there's rules if there's well interference. In other states, like in Illinois, it's a law of reasonable use, so it's a little tougher. You have to basically prove that someone's caused your water interference problems, and that could involve going to court. The other thing I want to talk about, and this is, I'm using this question as a lead-in. There are guidelines. Are there guidelines that real estate professionals require that are not required by the state? We already talked about New Jersey, Oregon, and Rhode Island, and even some local jurisdictions like the county of New York, that may create their own rules. But you really have to check that out for yourself to know. And as far as real estate rules, I don't know of any per se, like from for your state real estate association or Realtors Association. You'd have to check with them. And I assume if you're licensed in the state, you work with them already. But there's also rules that vary, like through HUD or other lenders, where a bank may say, we require this. And that's in an effort to ensure the value of the property. They don't want to give a loan for a home that looks like it's worth $300,000, only to find out that there's no water and it's going to cost, $10,000 or $15,000, or maybe water's going to have to be, in some cases, there's no water available, period, and you're going to have to truck water in regularly. And that really happens. And so that's going to devalue the value of that property. And so you really need to know those things. But the other confusion that I found is with the rules from HUD. So for FHA loans, VA loans, or HUD loans, this is right out of that 1000.4 document, or 4000.1. I can't remember. I got another slide that shows this, but it says a mortgagee must confirm that a connection is made to the public or community water system when it's feasible and available at a reasonable cost. Actually, that's a good idea, because there's a lot of people who really don't want to make the effort to become a knowledgeable well owner. And if they can hook up to a community system, it's going to make life a lot easier for them. They pay their water bill and they move on, but they know their water's safe because it's being treated and cared for by a water system that's being regulated by the state. But if that's not possible, then they can have an existing on-site system as long as it meets the requirements of the local health department. Well, that's a really poor worded thing, because some health departments have no rules. Some may have very strict rules that their neighbor across the street is in another health district, they don't have to follow. So it's really not equal protection for everybody. And so, and they say you have to connect, right? But this is the other part of that. It says when an individual water system is present, the mortgagee must ensure that the water quality meets the requirements of the health authority of jurisdiction, the local health department. If there are no local or state water quality standards, then water quality must meet the standards set forth by the EPA as presented in the National Primary Drinking Water Regulations. In 40 CFR 141 and 42, that's the Safe Drinking Water Act. And that's what communities have to do. They have to sample every 3 months, they have to have a licensed driller, and they have to test for hundreds of things and make sure they're not in there. Now, the way the rules are for communities, if you can show that you don't have it under a number of different tests, then you can not have to test for it as often. But what they're saying here is they're going to require, if this county or state or local have no rules, you're supposed to test for all the MCLs, the primary drinking water standards, which I know no one who does that. So what's happened, well, let me show you this first. These are the National Drinking Water Regulations, National Primary Standards, or MCLs. That's the second column. This is 7 pages long, and this is about half the first page. There are several hundred constituents here. And the MCL is what you have to meet. On the far right is a public health goal. So like for arsenic, the standard is 0.01 milligrams per liter, which is 10 parts per billion. And obviously the goal is 0, because there's some evidence that even below 10, it can cause problems in certain affected people. But the risk is assessed, and that's how they determine all that. But there's 7 pages of these regs. And so you would have to test for all of these if you followed the letter of the law, so to speak, with the HUD rules. And again, no one does that. So what's happened is we find this now. This table is from a mortgagee letter that HUD put together in 1994. It was superseded in 1998, so it's no longer valid. Yet somehow somebody took this and made a clean copy of it and put it on the web. And I found it on a mortgage company's page in Michigan. But there's other groups that pass this out and say they'll write letters even for a realtor or the seller saying this is what they needed to test for. They've done that. It's met these things. This is wrong. This is not what HUD requires today. But a lot of times it slips through because the local bank or whatever doesn't understand this well enough. But it's right in the rules if you look at it for our HUD loans. And so I wanted to just make that clear, because if you're one of the folks that's still using this information, it's out. It's not. It's, you know, it could come back to haunt you. And that's, again, there's no real list. It's unless there's a local or a state list. There's no list from HUD. There's only the EPA public water supply requirements, and those are super extensive and expensive and include things that would never be in a well, like algal toxins, right? So what about small subdivisions with one well for up to 12 homes? So I already explained the shared well, that we have a video about that. There's a lot of issues, and we see these all over the country, and we get questions. I just got a question 2 weeks ago from someone here in Illinois who lives in a home where there are 7 homes on the well, and they're having a coliform bacteria problem. And so, you know, they said, well, that we had somebody come out and disinfect the well. And, you know, my first thought was they didn't disinfect it properly, because to really disinfect your system, you have to run water through all of the homes in every pipe and out every faucet, toilet, and shower. And chlorinated water has to hit every one of those, or there still could be coliform in your pipe somewhere. And so I emailed them back and told them that advice. They said, we did that the first time. The second time we came back and did this, and they're still having problems. Well, they're going to end up spending a lot of money on this, and they need to have an agreement in place on who's going to pay what. And that's one of the things. If you're in an association where there's multiple homes on a well, you need a written contract among everybody so that everyone shares the expenses and the responsibility. And if it's not in the deed, that's better, but it should be, because that way, if you have none of those things in place and the home that actually has the well on their property gets sold, the new homeowner may come in and say, I'm not sharing my well with everybody, and they may cut you off, and you have no legal recourse but to drill your own well. So you need to have a fund for repairs. I had a subdivision last year that they were up in arms, and they were all fighting because it was going to cost $3,000 to replace a pump, and some of the folks said they couldn't pay it. And so you need to have that. People need to pay a water bill, basically. You need to have someone who's in charge. We had another case where someone had a fund for that, and they let the person who owned the well, technically it was on their property, manage those funds. And when he sold his home, he said he used them all and took all the money with him. So it ruins relationships. A lot of times you'll have pressure issues because, you know, the homes closest to the well may have better pressure than the ones on the end. Again, the disinfection problem I mentioned, and also making sure you're testing or treating so that everybody's on the same page. So they're just really ill-advised. And if you can get out of that situation, it's the way to go. And I would even steer people away from homes that are on those situations unless some of those things are in place and it's well documented. What might cause sputtering, spitting from my faucets, especially in the morning? How do we solve this issue? So in the ground, water's under pressure. It seems it's not the most intuitive thing, but especially for a deeper aquifer, like if there's 100 feet of clay and then you hit sand, that 100 feet of clay has weight, and it keeps pressure in the water that's in, you know, that sand and gravel. So a lot of times you have dissolved gases from releases of things like organic matter, which is where methane comes in. I have in this answer. When you bring that water up to the surface and it gets to atmospheric pressure, which is much less, it depressurizes the water and the gas comes out of solution. So we see 2 cases where this happens. One is methane. You've all seen videos where someone can light their faucet. That's methane that's coming out of solution because the pressure's off of it. You know, it goes back to that equation we learned in high school in chemistry, PV equals nRT. P is pressure, V is volume, and T is temperature. When you put enough pressure on it, it keeps it in solution. But whenever you let the pressure off, it expands and that lets the gas out. The other place we see it is with you know, the rotten egg smell from hydrogen sulfide. If you have an aquifer that has some of that in the water, it releases when it gets to the surface. And so the way to solve that really is, you know, there's wells in one of the aquifers in our state that I've worked in a lot. There are actually wells that have a vent on the top of the well cap, and you can light it. It's kind of cool, but it's, you know, it's just there's that much methane being released. But you can also, the way to solve it in your home is to put a vented tank ahead of your pressure tank. And so the vented tank has a vent going to the outside. It's not under pressure, so it's got a free surface. But you put the water in there first and then push the water into your pressure tank to keep your pressure up. But that allows the water to have some time exposed to lower pressure, and it can vent off that gas. And your contractor may have a better solution. I'm not a contractor, but I know that solution has worked for some folks. So for well disinfection, is putting a well in sorry, my question, I misworded that and I didn't catch it. Is putting bleach in a well monthly a good idea? And it's one of many questions we got about disinfecting a well. It's actually a really bad idea just to pour bleach down your well, for one, because it's at the wrong concentration. And two, you shouldn't put bleach in your well at any time unless you have sampled first and you have bacteria in your well. There's no reason to chlorinate your well on a regular basis. If your well doesn't have bacteria, that means your well's safe. You know, even public water supplies, some subdivisions and stuff, until recently, state agencies didn't require them to chlorinate or disinfect their water because there was no reason to. There's no bacteria in it, and it doesn't get bacteria in it. If it's a safe, closed system, then it won't be a problem. But if you put straight bleach in your well, there's another question about pouring bleach in today. That's too concentrated and it's an oxidant, so it can leach metals out of both the pipe that's going down to your pump itself, if it's in the well, the casing, if it's that kind of casing, or if it's in bedrock, the metals that are naturally occurring in that bedrock. So what we did, I mentioned we had 70 or so different documents that we'd reviewed about how to disinfect your well. So we chose what I feel is the best one, and that's from Minnesota Department of Health. It's a really useful guide on how to disinfect your well properly. It walks you through step by step, tells you when to turn off your pump. You pour it in a mixed solution so it's at the right concentration depending on the size of your casing and how deep your well is. And that's in our class lessons. I showed you the lesson 1 and 2 and all those resources. If you went on down that page, lesson 10 has this document. And you need to get it from our webpage, not from Minnesota Department of Health, because a few years ago they changed this document. They felt like it was too long because it's like 8 or 10 pages long. And they had actually, I know this from talking to someone at MDH or DPH, they had a marketing firm come in and go through all their documents, and they suggested they streamline this. They took out the tables and the pictures, and those are important. And so we've kept the old one that we already had on our website, or available. We linked to it from a database. And we use that instead of the new one, which isn't nearly as comprehensive and walk you through step by step. But it does. It tells you, it shows you pictures, why you need to mix it, how to do that. You know, it tells you if it's been a long time or if you've never done it. This can dislodge things, and you may see stuff coming up in your plumbing, but you know you need to get rid of it. Either you got to do it several times. But it explains that you need to run the water after you've chlorinated the well and recirculated it. Then you need to run the water through every faucet and pipe in your home. And then you know, what we recommend is you let it sit overnight, and that way the chlorine can work on the bacteria that might be in your pipes. And the next morning you turn on all your faucets again, and your toilets, flush them, and your shower until you don't smell the chlorine anymore, and all the chlorine's gone. And if it did leach any metals, that will be gone too. It'll be gone to waste. And it should be back to the normal system you had before, but hopefully without bacteria in it. Even has information if you have treatment equipment on what you should do to take those filters off, or whether you should unplug your softener and bypass it and all that kind of thing. So a couple caveats here, because chlorine's been the accepted way to disinfect a well forever, but we're learning that there's some issues and it's complicated. The geology is complicated. The pH can be different and can cause problems. One thing I didn't know until 5 or 6 years ago is that bottom bullet, above pH of 8, chlorine's less effective. So in that case, as the pH goes up, the chlorine can't work as a disinfectant as well. And you may put in a lot of chlorine and you may not still kill your bacteria. And that could be one reason why, if you've chlorinated and you take another sample, you need to measure your pH and find out if that's an issue. It could also be because there's enough bacteria there that it could take several times to kill everything. And in the top bullet, you could have a continuous source. It may be that your well is too close to a septic system or a feed lot. I've sampled large diameter wells that were actually in the middle of a feed lot. And I don't mean a pasture where cattle have grass and they can walk around, over several acres. I mean a feed lot next to the barn that's 6 inches of mud all the time because of how many cattle are in there. And they have a shallow well right in the middle of it. And so in that case, their well is always going to have bacteria in it. It's just, there's no way to avoid that contamination. And so when that happens, you need to add continuous disinfection. And there's 2 ways to do that. Well, there's several other ways, but the most common would be to add a continuous chlorine feed, and not the pellets that they used to have. Most states have outlawed those, but a chlorine solution that you add to your, either before your pressure tank or after your pressure tank, or you can add UV light disinfection. And that's becoming more popular. We see in a lot of areas where there's karst topography, the caves and fissures in southern Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, as well as other areas, New York, Arizona. They make UVs become more affordable, and it also kills all that bacteria and all that stuff. It's just, again, it has to be maintained. The lamp, it can get clogged because of other things in there. A lot of times you'll need to put a couple filters in front of it to make sure the water's pretty clean before it goes through the UV, so it's killing whatever bacteria are getting through. So there's options, and you talk to a treatment professional about that. If you can't get rid of the bacteria after you've tried to chlorinate. So I added this. This was actually asked last time, but it gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. What's the most important for a realtor should ask the seller about a well? It's a great question. And there's really a lot of things. You need to understand the entire home situation. And so, have they tested, and for what? Have they ever had any problems with water quality or with water quantity issues? Have they ever ran out of water in a dry summer? Do you know if their well's constructed to code? How old is it? Is there a well log? When's the last time you had it serviced, or have you ever had to? Do you know how old the pump is? We asked drillers around the country at the same time how long pumps should last. We got everything from 25 years to 8 years. But the person I talked to about earlier that I work with, who has galvanized piping in their home, their pump was put in 1960 and just failed 2 years ago. So, it lasted 58 years. So you just never know. But you need to know how old it is, because it's going to be a matter of, if it's only 2 years old, then you want to see if they have the service records, or not service records, but the sale record, and talk to that company and those sorts of things too. And if they have treatment devices, do they maintain them? What are they treating for? And then again, where's the well and septic and all those things located, which you should already be doing anyway. So we're about to the end. I want to mention, if you do webinars yourself, so if you're a EHP or a county health department or local health department or state health department, or a realtor who does webinars for their clients, we do a lot of webinars, both through our private well program, and this is wateroperator.org, which is kind of our sister program. We also get funding from EPA and RCAP to provide resources for small water and wastewater systems, and it's to help those small communities and rural communities that are under 10,000 people. Our communications lead, Jennifer Wilson, is an expert at social media and doing all these things. Everything I do is because they make me look good. And so on December 10th, on our wateroperator.org side, we're doing a webinar on just how to do webinars well. And so it's worth your time if you're into those, if you're into that. And if you go to wateroperator.org, one of the buttons at the top is our event calendar. And if you click on that, you'll see a list of all the webinars that have been done this year for that program. And the bottom one for December 10th is there's a registration link there. And then next month for us, for the private well class, we're doing two. We're doing our regular monthly webinar for well owners, in this case, on how to find local help and information. Really it walks through the basics of how you use Google and other things to find information for your local area. As a lot of folks just don't think that information is available, or they can't reach out to certain groups, like some people don't trust their health department. 99% of the time, that's a bad assumption. They're there to help you. And then we also are doing a 4-hour workshop that's really just for environmental health professionals. We only do it once a year, and it's about the assessment tool we've developed on how to assess a well. And it's something you have to have some wherewithal and understand well issues in order to actually use, as well as how to do outreach to well owners. And that's something we were funded a number of years ago by CDC to look at programs around the country that were doing outreach to well owners and what they did well, what they would do differently, what kind of issues they had. And we compiled all that, and it's in this program. And so that's free, and it's worth 4 hours of CE credit through NEHA, and it's going to be on December 16th. And you can get to both of those by going to our calendar page, or our webinar page, actually. Just the URL is actually calendar, but it's on the top menu, it's webinars, and you can get to that information. So with that, that's all I have today. So I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to bring up our questions. Let me pull that over. And I just killed it, Katie. I hit the wrong button, so I apologize. Give me 1 second. Oh, my lands.
I can resend it to your Skype if you have your Skype up here.
Well, I've got the email. I just have to get to it. So just give me 1 second to get to Katie's email. And I can do this. I got it.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, so I meant to hit full screen. And so please discuss how to get a well pump inspection for a buyer. Well, most of the time you don't need to inspect the pump. You need to know how old it is and if they've had any problems with it. A lot of times pumps are submersible, which means they're down in the well. And if you really want to do that, you'd have to have a drilling contractor come out and pull it. I know from experience, because when we try to measure water levels in wells, a few times we've got our steel tape stuck, that to pull that pump to get a tape out and look at it's at least $500 to $1,000. And most of the times it's just not something that's regularly done. If you know the age, especially if the bill of sale and those sorts of things, you typically don't need to actually see the pump unless there's some reason you don't trust it and the buyer's willing to spend the money for it. One thing when you open up a well, you also, what we recommend to people is that you then would disinfect it, because you're going to introduce stuff. And so it's quite a process then. And the seller is going to have to be willing to go along with all that. And I'm not so sure I would want someone to pull my pump if I'm living there, because then it would have to be disinfected. At least I would. So yeah. How does your water table how shallow does your water table have to be considered at risk for contaminants under the influence of surface water? It's not about how shallow, it's about the soil type, what things are going on in the area. Like the old well I showed that was in a cow pasture, there's sources there. But anything, if it's on a sloped hill, there was a field above that well, and if at certain times of the year they're putting in hydrous or any kind of pesticides on the corn or soybeans or whatever there, some of that could leach down into that well if it's close, and because it's really variable. But if you're getting your water from the water table, then the water table is where water is infiltrated down from the surface and it reaches a saturated point. So there's water in the soil above the water table. So the water level is at 8 feet, like it is here in Champaign County, Illinois. It's not like the soil above that's completely dry. It's at some level of moisture, maybe 80% saturated or 60% saturated, depending on how few days ago it rained, or, there's shallow aquifers up in the Kankakee County area, for instance. We had 7 inches of rain over 4 days. And I'm dating myself, but this was in 1986. I was a grad student, and it caused all the wells in the area, even in the Dolomite, because the bedrock aquifer, because the water could get to the aquifer so quickly, it caused a number of those wells to start flowing that were in lower areas. And so it's very variable. We have to look at your situation. Yeah, but in general, if it's close to the surface and it's getting water from the water table, you should consider it under the influence of the surface. And some people test more often, but I think if you've tested, maybe even test for just bacteria and nitrate every other month or every 3 months for a while. And if you never have a hit, then there's something going on there. Either most of the water's running off, or some other situation where you don't need to test so often. But yeah, there's no one shallow value. Just like I say shallow wells, and people want to know, what do you mean by shallow well? Well, it really depends on where you live and what the geology is, what's considered shallow. Yeah, and that's just all that stuff comes into play. What do they use Portland grout for? Well, grout, so when you drill a well, you drill the hole bigger than the casing so that you can fit the casing down in it, right? And so you can also, if it's a sand and gravel well, so you can put gravel pack down around the screen when you're done. So you use bentonite, usually a powder, with the water to make it thick, and that's when they drill. Especially if you're drilling with a rotary rig, you're drilling. It runs water down through the middle of the drill rod, and it comes out through the bottom of the drill bit, but it's thick, so it keeps the sand from caving in or whatever material you're drilling through from caving in. But then it comes back out through the annulus, which is the area around the drill bit, and it comes up out of the ground, and it gets rid of all the material you've cut up and tore up with your drill bit. So after you put in the well, you say you were going to put in a 5-inch well casing, you might drill a 6 5/8 well or 7.5-inch well bore. So that's what the drill bit width was. So now you have a 7.5-inch hole, and you're putting in a 5-inch well. So the area around the outside of the well, you need to grout it. And that's so that, and grout is a cement or a clay that doesn't allow water flow. So it's very fine. And Portland cement is the cement side. And when you say grout, it's usually Portland cement. But grout means it's the clay cementy material that goes in the well bore, the 7.5-inch hole, but outside the 5-inch casing, so that water can't run down along the casing and contaminate your well. So most states have grout rules. So when you drill a well, you have to put in grout. And that's so that the well is safe and things from the surface can't run down in. So hopefully I've explained that well and not been confusing. I kind of got off track there. Sorry about that. What kind of water treatment systems can be used instead of water softener systems? Well, RO and filtration systems take care of not only the chemicals and microbes, but the water hardness. I am not a treatment expert, but I don't believe there's a better way to do things than softening. RO takes out a lot of things, but specifically if it takes out, what you're taking out to reduce the hardness, I'm not 100% sure. I do know that softeners sometimes have added benefits, even though they're not meant to. Just as an artifact of, removing some iron and manganese, a softener may also remove some arsenic, because arsenic co-precipitates with iron. And so we've, in Illinois, we have a lab that does testing for private well owners in Illinois. And I looked at a bunch of data from samples where we took a sample from an outside spigot or at the wellhead, if they had a faucet or a hydrant, and then also from their kitchen tap. So there's 2 different samples there. One is the groundwater quality, basically, because it's coming from the well directly. And one is your drinking water quality coming from your kitchen sink after it's been through a filter, a softener, your lead pipes, if you have them or whatever. And the water chemistry can be very different, especially after it's been through any kind of treatment. And so we actually recommend that people do both. And if you can hear that, I apologize. My phone just rang. I thought I had that off. Okay, so it's important to know if those things are working for one in those respects. But again, yeah, to answer your question, if you'll email me, if you email us at info@privatewellclass.org, my boss will know the answer. He's a geochemist, and our lab will know the answer, and I can just send you that answer. And that's the best I can do because I don't know of an alternative to a water softener to get rid of hardness, but I'm sure there probably is. It's just not, it must not be very cost friendly or easy to maintain, or you'd see a lot more people doing, there'd be other options that are more available. So, okay. So that's the questions we have. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone sticking on for so long. If you do want CEs or a certificate, oh, and I forgot to mention, we're a licensed Illinois LEHP provider. We can't do that for every state because of the effort it takes to become a licensed provider in each state. We did that for Illinois mainly because we live here, and a lot of our role is working with our county health departments and some of those folks. But you can get a NEHA CE attendance form, or you take that and it's in our handout section on your GoToWebinar window, and fill that out and send it to us, as well as we can send you a copy of the slide deck from today and answer any other questions, or if you have a specific form that we can provide you, but we provide a certificate for that along with the NEHA credit. So thanks everyone for sticking around, and everyone have a great day and weekend. Thanks, Katie, for all your help.
Thank you.